As always, donate to Jumpstart. Jumpstart helps economically disadvantaged kids play team sports, which is something that's near and dear to Rachel and I's hearts. So if you go to the links in this description below, pretty much all the information that you will need to donate is there. So we really encourage you, if you can, to do so. Again, it's a great cause. We love Jumpstart. They are our charity of choice. If you can, please donate.
This is a special episode of Puck Social. We are covering the Hockey Canada trial. We're going to do weekly updates. Every Saturday or Sunday they'll come out so that you can listen. This comes with a heavy trigger warning. There's graphic details of violent sexual behavior, and it's important that this is a separate episode so that you can enjoy our regular podcasts while still keeping up to the trial, or for those of our listeners that don't want to do that because it may be triggering for them, we wanted to give them the option to still be able to listen to the show without that. So what's going to happen is I'm going to read through kind of the happenings of what's gone on, starting with EM's testimony and leading into the end of the week and where that sets us up for next week. So, like I said, major trigger warning. The Crown started examining EM, who's the victim in this case, and there were some harrowing details that came out of her testimony. She talked about how the guys were joking about shoving golf balls and golf clubs into her vagina, and that is, I mean, not only is that something you shouldn't joke about, that's just something you shouldn't do. At one point, Michael McLeod was saying no phones, because they didn't want anything to be recorded. They were smacking her buttocks so hard that she told them to stop because it hurt too much. More importantly, she said she was having an out-of-body experience. She thought she might have been roofied. She didn't feel like she could say no or leave. And having an out-of-body experience is actually pretty typical during a traumatic event. You see this in times of death, times of extreme sort of stress. People kind of detach mentally from their bodies and kind of feel like they're watching their body go through something. That is like one of the number one signs of trauma. The defense was suggesting that she didn't feel, that she can't feel different after reflecting on it months and years later versus immediately after it happened. So the defense asked the victim why she didn't press charges right away, why she didn't pursue it, why she didn't do anything. And she said she hadn't really processed what she'd been through and that she was kind of blocking out the feelings. And the suggestion that you can't feel different after you reflect on something, I think as human beings, we can all understand that it's just not true. As you sort of go through an experience, specifically a traumatic one, you absolutely can reflect it and feel a different way. The defense began suggesting that she accused them of sexual assault so that her new relationship wouldn't be ruined. She's actually engaged to that particular individual now. So I think the suggestion that she lied about this so that her new relationship at the time, they'd only been seeing each other for a few months, wouldn't be ruined is kind of ridiculous. If her partner is supporting her through this, that's probably not going to be a worry. They were suggesting like she was acting, quote, like a porn star and, quote, wanted the attention. Quote, you could have just got up and left. And she said, one of them said, she's crying, don't let her leave. She's crying, don't let her leave. That's a lot to sit with. The allegations of acting like a porn star and wanting the attention, the notion that she could have just got up and left. Anyone who's ever been in a situation with one or two imposing individuals, let alone 10, knows that that's simply untrue. It's not the case. You don't feel like you can leave because of what may happen. And so the moment someone's crying and you don't let them leave, it's pretty obvious that it's not consensual. Like, I think that at a bare minimum, she's crying, don't let her leave. The fact that that needed to be said by anyone is a telltale sign that it's not consensual, or at least part of the night was not consensual. Another thing that Megan Savard brought up, Carter Hart's lawyer, that feelings aren't memories, yet they're asking her about things that happened that night, and the way that a lot of people recollect that is through their feelings. Specifically, traumatic events, you remember things because of how you felt. If something doesn't make you feel a type of way, then it's probably not all that memorable, and you're not going to remember it. And so feelings aren't memories. That's sure, the memories of what happened aren't feelings, but you can certainly remember how you feel. Court ended on Tuesday because EM broke down crying, given the tenor that Carter Hart's lawyer was taking with her, and the consistent attacks implying that she was lying, implying that she could have got up and left, implying that feelings aren't memories, all of those things. This was, I believe, her third or fourth day of examination, and so that can be a lot. The next day she comes back, she says it's impossible to have a complete recollection of what happened 7 years ago, especially when alcohol is involved and a traumatic event happened. Between the out-of-body experience, a significant amount of alcohol being improved, and the fact that it was 7 years ago, I think any reasonable person would say, yeah, you're probably not going to be able to recollect the finer details of the night. And so she was being attacked by defense lawyers saying that some of the finer details in her story was changing, and she fought back to her credit and said, well, she hadn't been able to read her police statement before giving a statement to, or she hadn't been able to read the statement she gave in 2018 before she gave her statement to police for the investigation, which was 4 years later. And so it's very plausible that some of the finer details may not have been correct. She originally said Sam Steele was the one that she gave oral sex to. He was misidentified, but a player in the room correctly identified that it was Carter Hart, not Sam Steele. And in her interviews with police, she didn't actually want to give names or point anyone out because she said everything was so fuzzy and she didn't want to misidentify anyone. And when they pressed her, she misidentified Sam Steele, and somebody else identified him as Carter Hart. If you look at pictures of those two guys, yeah, you could absolutely see how that would be confusing. The victim said she felt intimidated and she had to go along with what they wanted, which kind of goes to they wouldn't let her leave, and she could not have just got up and left. When she did end up leaving at the end of the night, she forgot a ring and she went back for it just once everyone had left and couldn't find it. She said she felt disrespected and treated like an object, which goes to the out-of-body experience. When you feel you're being treated that way, you're going to detach so that it causes the least amount of mental damage possible. Throughout the cross-examination with the defense lawyers, there was a number of, call it, concerning narratives, and a lot of it surrounds victim blaming. They said she wasn't drunk enough. They said she could have left. They said she wanted to be a porn star. She was accused of leaking the Hockey Canada settlement to the media, and she fought back and said she was actually under the impression that it would be private or sealed, and she was shocked that it was released. Daniel Brown, in particular, who wrote a textbook on defending sexual assault allegations, so that's the kind of human being he is, advanced the theory of an alter ego. There was fun EM and sober EM. And that she didn't mention the bouncer at Jack's who was her friend because he would have said she was lying. That's an outrageous thing to say. I mean, if you thought that, then he would probably be testifying, would he not? Another theory was all of them deliberately trying to get her to second guess herself, and basically say that she was lying. A theory that she didn't text her best friend to tell her what happened, so it must not have happened. I'm sorry. That is... You feel shame and embarrassment when that happens, and running and telling people is definitely not it. I know when I had traumatic experiences as it relates to sexual violence, telling my friends was certainly not the first thing I did. When she eventually told her friend said, "I'm so sorry, you couldn't have known he was going to be an asshole," he being Michael McLeod. You can't blame yourself. So that's the friend's initial reaction. Another one that Juliana Greenspan kind of decided to take was she would refer to them as just boys instead of men to try and get sympathy from the jury. When you're 19 and 20 years old, you are not a boy. You are a legal age to vote. You are a legal adult. You are legal age to drink. So the notion that they were boys and not men is false. They also said that they believe she was taunting the men for sex. So they're kind of spinning it back on her. And let's focus on Daniel Brown, who's Alex Formenton's lawyer. And Alex Formenton's actually accused of having non-consensual sex intercourse with her, which obviously rises very close to the line of rape. So he said, "I'm not trying to play a game of got you," yet he tried to twist her words about feeling fault for what happened. The victim had said that she blamed herself originally, and then upon further reflection, she realized that it wasn't her fault that some of the behavior that occurred that night had occurred. He's saying it's easier for her to deny her choices than acknowledge the shame and guilt that she did for making those choices. So he's spinning it around on her. He pressed her about being attracted to Brett Howden and Michael McLeod, and he says that the victim initiated the sex with Formenton and was egging the other players on. Her description of Formenton's intercourse was that she went into the bathroom, he followed her, put on a condom, bent her over the sink, and began to have intercourse with her. I don't know how that counts as egging somebody on, but okay. Once the defense was done, it was Thursday, and the Crown gets to do a re-examination. And the purposes of re-examination are pretty simple. There's three of them. They either have to rehabilitate the witness credibility, they clarify evidence that was brought up on cross. So in this case, there was a lot of that in terms of the theories. And they give the victim a chance to elaborate or contextualize evidence that came up. So like the lawyers kept cutting her off. They kept complaining to the judge that she was giving long-winded answers. And so this is kind of her opportunity to stand up and speak, and the Crown lets her finish and really explain and contextualize the evidence that the lawyers tried to like cut her off from giving more detail on. So that's kind of where that stands. The victim blaming that we saw this week was pretty shameful. The Canadian justice system is set up to harm victims more than it is to help them as it pertains to sexual violence. Samantha Chang on Twitter put out a great thread that has the decision from the Supreme Court that actually details where the justices believe that. And I think part of this is, I'm not saying that the accused aren't entitled to the best defense possible. They are. I think the Canadian justice system fails victims, and we probably need to have a look at whether or not victim blaming should be allowed in terms of creating doubt. If there are other people that said that she was taunting, or other people that said that she wanted to hide this because she had cheated on her boyfriend, and other people that said, oh, she didn't text her friend because it didn't happen, or her friend came on and said she thought she was lying, then I could understand maybe some victim blaming. But that shouldn't be a defense strategy that's allowed to advance without some kind of evidence pointing it in that direction. So I think from that perspective, the Canadian justice system needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror. Then on Friday, we had some really interesting developments. So until Friday morning, there was a publication ban on why there was a first mistrial. There was a publication ban on anything that was discussed outside the presence of the jury because they're deciding the case. And that all changed on Friday. So on Friday, the second jury was dismissed. And instead of having a mistrial, both the court and the defense agreed that the trial will continue with a judge-only verdict, which means that the best way for these guys to get a fair trial is for a judge to decide the verdict. So Judge Maria Corrochia is going to continue to hear the evidence and make the decision herself. But we did find out why there was a first mistrial, and we found out why the second one has to go to judge only. The first mistrial was because Formenton's defense lawyer, Hillary Dudding, made inappropriate contact outside the courtroom on a lunch break with a juror. And you can go to Katie Strang's reporting in The Athletic to see this, but effectively kind of what happened was they were in line for lunch, and the lawyer made a comment to the juror about the case, which is obviously strictly prohibited, and so we had to have a mistrial given that there was inappropriate contact. Then earlier this week. The reason the second trial has to be by a judge now is because multiple jurors sent notes to the judge saying that the conduct of Formenton's lawyers, Daniel Brown and Hillary Dutton, made them feel judged with how they would look at them. They would snicker, they would talk about them, and they just made them feel uncomfortable, and they found their conduct to be unprofessional. Obviously, that impacts their ability to be impartial, and so with everything going on, the judge decided to dismiss the jury and that there would be a judge-only verdict. There was some other very concerning things that happened throughout this trial. Somebody got into the courthouse and was harassing journalists so much so that this person had to be removed and banned from the premises, saying that it's all the journalists' fault, and he ruined these boys' lives and he's the reason they're on trial. No, the reason they're on trial is because they were charged and there was a reasonable possibility that a crime occurred and they deserve a defense. But to say that it's a journalist's fault kind of speaks to where we're at in terms of hockey culture. And then another issue was a lawyer who had been listening into the proceedings had gone on a radio show and let out the secret of where the victim was testifying from, like a closed circuit room in the courthouse, and somebody tried to go and find the victim, which would obviously not only remove the publication ban or put it in jeopardy, but it would also really jeopardize the testimony and the trial. And so this trial has been a circus so far. It's been insane, and hopefully with the judge-only trial now, that kind of stuff calms down. So we'll see, but that's everything you need to know heading into the week ahead and everything that's happened. Support to EM and everything that she's been through. Anybody who has to testify for 8 or 9 days over the course of 2 weeks, that's a lot, and that would get to anybody. So strength and peace to her, and we'll be back next weekend with another update.